very much. Thanks for having me. All right. Hi, as Keith did a good job of doing. I'm Terry Ryan. I'm a developer evangelist with Adobe. If you have any questions or comments during this, please feel free to tweet me at TTRyan. I will obviously won't see it during it, but if anything comes up, questions or criticism, it's fine. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me around a talk. So before I get into what I want to talk about, I want to know a little bit more about you guys, just to help me figure out what I can skip through, what I can maybe spend a little bit more time on, what jokes to make, that sort of thing. So,
hard to hear.
What's that? You can't hear me? All right. All right, this is great. The week after I lost my voice. All right, I will try to keep the volume up. If you're having trouble hearing me, if I'm mumbling, please just be a little bit less subtle than that, like really wave and let me know. Okay, so obviously a lot of you guys are students. Who here is not a student? Okay. Are you staff? Are you faculty? Okay. Those of you that are students, are any of you guys not undergrads? Okay, graduate mostly? Okay. I know there was some talk of high school. Is there any high school here? Okay, great. All right, glad to have you. All right, how many of you guys have fooled around with HTML before? That's what I like to see. Okay. How many people have already going into this have an idea of what HTML5 is? Okay. How many haven't done any of the technical stuff at all? Awesome. So we have a good mix of stuff. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I thought this was the kind of mix of audience I would get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with very basic stuff. What is HTML? That level of basic. And then kind of move into what is HTML5, what can you do with it, show some demos off, and that sort of thing. So with that, I'm going to go, what is HTML5? And you'll notice that I have HTML5 in quotes, right? Because this isn't actually what HTML5 is. Most people outside of technology, when they say HTML5, they're not actually talking about HTML5, they're talking about HTML5. What is HTML5? HTML5 is a marketing term that means cool shit that works on an iPad. I stress this because this is difficult because when you start dealing with technical people and you say HTML5 for something that isn't technically HTML5, they get really annoyed and irritated, or they think they can take advantage of you. On the other hand, if you are a technical person talking to marketing people and you tell them that it's not HTML5 but it'll do what they want, they ignore you because they know what they need to be on the iPad is HTML5, right? So I want to give you a good basis of what HTML5 is versus what HTML5 is, okay? So HTML5 can actually mean HTML5. But a lot of times it also means CSS3. Sometimes it's JavaScript. Sometimes it's stuff that was actually introduced in CSS2. Sometimes they're talking about JavaScript frameworks. Isn't really HTML5. Sometimes it's Canvas, which actually is a part of HTML5, or video, which is part of HTML5. Or it's basically anything the speaker wants it to mean because they really want to land this contract because they want to write cool shit that works on an iPad. So, what is HTML5 without quotes? I'm going to come back to that in a second. But first I want to review so we know exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about each of these elements. What is HTML? HTML is a language that provides structure to content. So over here on the left, I have some unstructured content. It's just text. It's broken up a little bit, but for the most part, it's text. And if you put that into an HTML page and have a browser render it, you get what's on the right. It has no idea how to present it, no idea how to parse it. It just vomits it up as one giant big text comment. Okay? So with HTML, you start adding structure to it. I say this one is the header, highest level, or H1. Say this is an H2, which is the header, it's the lower level. I have a list, and then I have a paragraph, and you see the browser knows, oh, okay, I'm going to show this in a different way. And it structures the output. And the structure is important for browsers. It's important for search engines. It's important for accessibility. And that's why that difference is there. You're basically, and I won't go too deep into this, basically telling each element, each piece of content, what it is. Not how it should look, not what it should do, but what it actually is. I'll go deeper into that in a little bit. but that's the basics of what HTML is. So what is CSS? CSS is a language that provides style to content. So again, here's our HTML and the display. I'm going to add some CSS to it, very basic CSS, not by any means design award winning. You'll find as the course of this that I'm a developer, so a lot of my design type stuff, not that great. That's okay. I have a lot of friends that do design that help me out from time to time. But basically, so I take this and you'll see, all right, tell the H1 to be red, tell the H2 to be blue and italic, tell the paragraph to be black, or to be white on black text. So I apply that and this is how it looks. Okay? So HTML and CSS provide a separation of content from the display of that content. Why? A couple things. One, probably first and foremost in a lot of people's minds is SEO, or search engine optimization. Basically, the easier you make it, when you can do display stuff within HTML. But when you do, it kind of muddles the structure. And so a search engine looking at your, or a search engine that's indexing your site, that's looking at your site, looking at the content to display it in search results, it sees all that stuff, all that cruft of display stuff, and it doesn't necessarily confuse it, but it makes it rank stuff lower than it should. It's a less accurate representation of your site. So that's the first big one. Second big one, I think this is the most important, is it makes your work portable and changeable. You should be able to completely change the look and feel of your site without ever touching any of the content. So by keeping CSS display completely separate from presentation, you're able to do that. And that's going to allow for multiple ways to display. So for example, I've got mobile devices. A mobile website should look different than a desktop website. Mobile tends to be linear, whereas desktops can spread out and have multiple columns. Multiple columns really don't work on mobile devices that well. iPad being an exception to that, but that's because it's pretty much a desktop that you can hold. So if I have the content all separated from the CSS, and I want to show the same content on a mobile device, all I have to do is swap out the style sheets. So I don't have to worry about having two separate files with content in them in different places, and I make a change here, and I got to make a change here, and this gets out of sync, and no, you don't have to worry about any of that. You just keep the CSS separate, and you can do this. So for example, here I'm going to apply a new style sheet. I'm going to completely screw around with all of the hierarchy of what's what, and you'll see that I made the highest element very small compared to the second element, which is very big. And that list, which was vertical, is now horizontal, and there's no indication that it was a list. It's just a navigation kind of bar setup. So I was able to kind of, and this was a very minor, trivial change, was able to completely change the look and feel of it without having to do anything to the content. So that's CSS. What is JavaScript? JavaScript is the third thing you hear about when you talk about HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's a language that provides behavior to content. So for example, I want to have a button. You press that button, it sends an alert. That's all JavaScript. And the idea here is that anytime you need to calculate something or react to a user response that's not just a link or a form input, you're going to do that in JavaScript. So this kind of forms the basis of HTML development, right? You've got content, structure, style, and behavior. If you're most places, you have your content in a database someplace, and you've got some sort of tool that spits that content into HTML templates, which provide the structure. You then style that with CSS, and you add behavior with JavaScript. Some places, you might actually store the content in HTML directly. Don't ever bother with that database step. All right, so before I go forward, any questions about anything I've said here? It's all pretty intro. The people are still here. Yeah, all right, cool. Got a few smiles at that. All right. So what then is HTML5? Okay, we're ready to answer that. It is the fifth and most recent public specification for HTML from the public groups that, oh God. Actually, a lot of this, well, here's the most important stuff, right? It's the most recent specification for HTML. Okay, good. We can roll with that. Except there are a couple caveats to that. Most recent, well, it's not technically the most recent. It's actually a standard. It's not a specification. The difference kind of mind-boggling there, but yes, it's called something else. And while we're at it, there really is no HTML5. There's only HTML. There's this whole movement to get rid of versioning in HTML, so we don't have to go through this again. But it's really confusing and all this stuff. And this is why pragmatic people really, really often hate standards bodies. People that come up with this stuff. So what actually is new? What is the new stuff in HTML that's going to make your lives better? One, there's a whole bunch of new semantic elements. So H1 is a header, right? H2 is a header. P is a paragraph, right? So there's some new ones like article, section, aside, header, footer that correspond to the way people actually use HTML very often. There's also new multimedia elements, audio, video, canvas, for basically displaying more than just an image in a website. And then there are new APIs for manipulation in JavaScript. So the browser can now do things that the browser couldn't do before, and you're able to hook into them with these standard JavaScript APIs that should be the same browser to browser. There are things like offline data, the ability to store data in a site. So like, for example, Gmail, if you unplugged yourself from the network, you could still fool around with the mail without going back to the server. Drag and drop, being able to take files from your desktop and drop them onto to the browser to do stuff with them. Web storage, and a couple other things. Now I see a hand in the back. Yes?
API.
API, Application Programming Interface. It's basically a way of saying each browser provides these functions that you can call in JavaScript that are the same across all browsers that do stuff. So for example, if you want to, one of the things you can do is manipulate the history, right? You have the history window, you hit the back button, you see all the links there are. There's an API called the history API, and you say history, I don't know it off the top of my head, so bear with me, I'd have to look it up. But like history, go back one in JavaScript, and it'll go back to the last page in your history. You say, why you do that? You just hit the back button, but there might be reasons that you want to do that. So that interface is provided through something called an API.
Thank you.
I apologize, I got into acronym soup and kind of forgot what I was, forgot that people might not know that one. Okay, so this is what's new in HTML, in HTML5, but there's also stuff in CSS3 that really comes into play, right? CSS3 is a series of recommendation modules. The standards, can't we just say it's the latest official version of CSS? Well, it's not actually official. It's not the latest, and it's not a version because there are multiple modules that make up all this stuff. All right, let's just say HTML5 in quotes for everything, all right? We now know what we're talking about. We now know that there's separation, and so this is why the semantics are very important, because it is all kind of confusing and muddled, and what you say to a designer, obviously, or what you say to a client isn't necessarily what you say to a developer, and yada, yada, yada. All right, so what can you actually do with HTML5? Okay, first thing I want to get into is semantics, the semantics that have been added in HTML5. So semantic HTML means your markup describes its content without presenting it, right? Which is just a fancy way of saying separate presentation from design, or presentation from content. So in HTML terms, this is going to mean things like a P denotes a paragraph, right? A UL denotes a list of unordered items. An address contains address information. Div and span are extra little elements that you use to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, segment pieces of your site. It's also HTML where you don't use extraneous elements, or you don't misuse extraneous elements. So for example, having a P tag followed by a closing P tag will skip a line. But that's wrong, right? You shouldn't do that. You should use the break tag, which will do the exact same thing, but it won't accidentally fool the browser into thinking there's a paragraph there. Same thing, block quote. If you wrap something in block quote, the browser is going to indent it. But if you want to indent something, but it's not a quote, don't use block quote, right? Use save block quotes for things when you're quoting people with long quotations. H1 doesn't mean just use big text. It means it's a header, right? And then finally, you don't use presentational information with the semantic HTML. So no font tags, no B tags, no I tags, no inline styles. You can actually use CSS right within inline within HTML, but that's kind of discouraged because it's kind of breaking this idea of separating content from style. It's important to note that this is not Boolean, right? It's not like being pregnant, you're pregnant or not pregnant. You're semantic or not semantic. It's a continuum, right? So you're more semantic or less semantic and it's not obviously all always objective. But here's an example, and it's really hard to read, and it's hard to read even if you can't actually see if you're working HTML, it's painful to read. But basically, this is unsemantic content. I've got a table for structure. I've got font faces being called within the site. I'm putting backgrounds right in. This is how we'd like to see it done today, right? Div ID equals header, H1, awesome block of awesome, tagline, awesome the state of mind, right? Like, this is structured and styled. I'm sorry, this is structured, but there's no extraneous elements and nothing there that denotes how it should be displayed. Well, what does all this have to do with HTML5? Sorry, that's the inner hipster I hear when I'm doubting myself. HTML adds more semantic elements that we can further specify things. Header is a great example of this. The reason why there's a header tag in HTML5 is Google went through and checked out what are the most commonly used IDs in HTML. Header was one of them. Footer was one of them. Article was one of them. So you're going to see a lot of this. You know, it's kind of not. It's not unobvious why we pick those things. Next part before I get into it is, if you guys do any research into this in the future, if you go forward and you start reading people that talk about semantics, they're going to talk to you about outlines, right? Which basically, there's this new algorithm that outlines in browsers that support HTML5 that radically changes the way pages are outlined. And I honestly can see no reason why you would care about this, except if you're talking to someone who's semantic and really cares about this stuff. Now, it might have importance down the road. I could see screen readers for the blind kind of being able to pick into these things and work with them a little bit better. But if better outlines is your justification for using semantic HTML, you're doing it wrong. However, it is a semantically correct way of reducing the number of classes and divs you use so that your code becomes a little bit more readable, and that's why I'm totally behind this. So I'll just take you through a couple of these real quick. I won't go too deep into them. Obviously, a header has been replaced by the header tag. Footer, like so, has been replaced by a footer tag. Navigation, shockingly different, right? You've got a nav instead of a div ID nav, right? These things aren't too radically different. Here's how you start getting a little bit more radical. Something like an article, right? So this blog post, getting rid of all the other content. This just one blog post. Previously, you do something like this, where you have div class post post header, H3, I screen my thoughts, that's the title, a little bit of header information, and then the rest of the content. Now we've got an article, right? We've got a header, again, that's one of the cool things about being like an element, is I can just reuse that header. Before, if I have a div ID equals header in the top, I can reuse header at all. Now I can have an article header and a page header. I can switch back to H1. This will be important further down the road. I'll talk a little bit about it. But basically, in an article, I can start back over again at H1 and not screw up the outline of the page. That's actually going to do some cool stuff down the road. So that's that. Important thing about an article is a piece of content that can stand on its own. It's basically anything you would deep link to. So while we think of that as a blog post, it could also be a comment. It could also be a tweet. It could also be a reply to a tweet, right? It can be anything that you would want to have someone go to by itself. And then content, so we look at the whole page, recent posts. Before that would be div class equals content. Now that would be div class equals content. There's no real reason. It's content. Doesn't need to be specified further. You could, if you wanted to, with this specific one, change it to section, but it's not that important. All right, that's great. But frankly, all we did is change div ID header to header. How is that, that different or that better? Well, I think there's three real benefits to this. First one is beforehand, you get something like this at the end of your code. Closing div, closing div, closing div, div ID equals footer, closing div body. Here, with these new semantic things, you get less of that, three divs in a row, three closing divs in a row. And is that the section? Is that the article? Is that the comment? Where is that? What is that closing? It becomes kind of easier to deal with and less confusing. And so you write better code. It's easier to be maintained and all that kind of good stuff. Benefit two is there's less monkeying around with content hierarchies. And that sentence should be completely unparsable to you. What do I mean by that? So here we have the same blog post on 3 separate pages, right? A main page, an archive page, and a post page. On the main page, if you look, we've got, I'll go over and actually, what's up? So on the main page, we've got the awesome blog of awesome, which would be the H1. Recent posts, which would be the H2. And then I make a post thingy would be the title in H3. On the archive page, I've got H1 of the awesome blog of awesome, archive is 2, September 2001 is 3, and so I make a post thingy is H4. On a post page, all I've got is the H1, and then I made the post thingy would be an H2. So from a maintenance standpoint, I've got to handle, basically I want this to be a link that's blue, that's small caps, and is this point size. You see it's exactly the same in all 3 of these, but I'd have to write a rule for when on the main page it's targeting H3, when on an archive page it's targeting H4, when it's on a post page it's targeting H2. But under this, each one of these is an article under HTML5, and because the code, a header can start, an H1 can start an article, to target this, all I have to do is write one rule that targets article header H1. So this is going to incredibly simplify the CSS you write, make it a lot easier to kind of maintain that and figure out what you're doing and all over that. And then the third benefit is that you're no longer bound to only using a header once on a page or nav once on a page. If you have multiple pieces that are navigation, they can all be in a nav element and so forth. So it's important to note that these new elements work across modern browsers without fail. Although, what is your definition of modern? So, IE before 9 doesn't understand these HTML5 elements, and so if you try to use them in their page, they won't be styled at all, which kind of sucks. Except there's this technique called the HTML5 Shim. I don't know why they named it after a prison implement, but there you go. Basically, what it does is it allows versions of any browser, because there's still some Mozilla browsers running around that don't support it. But we're talking about IE. We can say Mozilla too, but it's IE. Basically, will allow IE to render these. Just add this one line of JavaScript to your code, and you're fine. So I'm seeing how I'm doing on time. I'm going to speed through a little bit of this to get to some other stuff. But let's see. So HTML5 includes a whole lot of different input types. We're talking about forms here. They aren't supported in every browser, but if the browser doesn't support them, it's just going to fall back to assuming it's a text input. First one is really easy. Search. If you put input type equals search, you're going to get a nice little, on Mac at least, on OS X, you're going to get this nice little curved window. Curved input box that on Safari is going to have the question mark. It's not going to have that on Chrome. What's really cool about this is that it actually has access to your recent searched entries. So it can actually kind of pull upon the browser to get search within your site a little bit more relevant to the user. Email. How many people here have iOS devices? Okay. You ever go to a site and you go to type in your email and instead of having like the normal keyboard, it has the one with the @ symbol, and it's like really great, and you're like, God, I don't have to go back and do that. Well, if you do that in just on your page, on iOS devices, it's going to do that. So even though it's on yours on your site, it'll still access that different keyboard. What's cool about this is if the browser doesn't support it, it'll just assume it's text and it'll be just like normal. Now, Chrome does support it, but it'll also provide validation. So if somebody types in something that is an email address, it'll automatically block it from being submitted, and they'll get a little notice that, hey, it's not an email. URL is the same deal, except instead of email, it's a URL. So it's going to give you the .com. It's going to give you the /, so it's a little bit easier to enter URLs. Number actually works on both iOS and Android devices. So either case, someone goes to put in a number field, it's going to pop up the numeric keyboard. On desktops, it provides a stepper, which you can't even see on this because it's a little washed out, but it's like this really, really small thing that you can target your mouth and click. It's not really that useful. But it's there, at least they're trying. Obviously is telephones. telephone numbers, and it's going to provide a keypad, a telephone keypad on both iOS and Android. So these next ones are not well supported across browsers, but they have a lot of potential because they're really cool, and I think they're going to be really useful. First one is a range. So basically it allows you to pull the kind of a slider, a sliding scale to input your numbers. And obviously you can set the step and min-max so that it's not just, it has some kind of number, but it's not that precise, right? Someone would have to know where to put stuff. And the last one is date, which is exactly what you think it is date time info. Right now, Opera is the only one that really does this well, and they display a date picker, which is awesome, right? No more having to pull in JavaScript date pickers to create a date interface. On Safari and Chrome, it provides a ticker, which is also perhaps one of the least useful things they could do, but hey, they're trying. Then IE, of course, will shatter your hopes and dreams like it always does from that But I think this is one of those things almost every site needs a date picker at some point. Browsers just handle it. It's going to come. It's going to take some time. I'm going to skip through these because they're kind of boring. I'm going to say, first off, I'm going to put this presentation up on SlideShare. I'll have the URL for my SlideShare account at the end of this. So if you see URLs that you like, you don't have to furiously scribble them down and take pictures. It'll be up on the web at the end of this. So that is the semantic stuff. In a moment I'm going to move on, but any questions about any of the semantic stuff? That was, just so you know, that was a iceberg-like view, right? Semantics, you can get into hour-long, day-long arguments with people over semantics. But we're cool with that? All right. So now I'm going to talk about multimedia. So one of the first pieces of multimedia that you hear big in HTML5 is Canvas. Canvas is basically a drawing surface for manipulating images, drawing on those images, and perhaps saving that content. So you can do a lot of things with Canvas. You can take existing images, fool around with their structure, fool around with their content, put stuff on them, draw shapes onto them. I'm not going to belabor this point too much. I'm actually just going to show a quick demo of what Canvas is capable of doing. So let me pull up. Hopefully, okay. Is that readable in the back, or do I need to bump up the font? Bump it up? Okay. Do I know how to bump it? Oh, there it is. Readable? Mm-hmm. All right. So I have here a basic Canvas demo. All right, you'll see here there's a Canvas tag. I give it an ID so I can target it in JavaScript. And that's pretty much it. All right, so it's a Canvas tag. Where the magic happens with Canvas is in JavaScript. So let me pull this up here. Okay. So I've got two functions here, draw rectangle and draw red rectangle. So let's look at draw rectangle. So basically I use document query selector to get the canvas. I could also do document get element by ID, or if you're using jQuery, this would be the equivalent of $hashtag the canvas. Long story short, I get it so I can manipulate it. I'm going to ask for the context, which is where I draw stuff, where I manipulate stuff. I get context 2D, because someday there will be a 3D. Opera, I believe, has the 3D context. All the rest don't have it yet. They're all 2D for now. And then I say context fill rectangle. Start at x0, y0, and make it 150 wide by 100. Okay? And so when I call that up in the code, you'll see hit draw rectangle. Boom. Thrillingly exciting, right? Again, this is where we get to the limits of my drawing and design skill. And then draw a red rectangle, I can do a little bit more. I can set a fill style, set a stroke style, line width, so I'm creating a line around it. And I create two rectangles, a fill rectangle and a stroke rectangle. So this is going to create a red rectangle with a blue rectangle around it that's 4 pixels wide as a stroke. So it sounds dirty, but it's not. There we go. And now I've got a second rectangle. Now what's kind of interesting here is I kind of fooled around with the fill and color settings. for the context, and it affects it for the whole page. So if I hit draw rectangle again, it should have created a black one, but because I manipulated it, it creates a red one. Yay! Killer demo of Canvas. You can do a lot more with Canvas. Unfortunately, Canvas is one of those things. I was a Flash guy, and so this is still a little painful to do Canvas as a Flash guy, just because, you know, I don't want to get too into it. It's too emotional. Sorry. But anyway, so that is a quick demo of Canvas, without going too crazy into it. If you want more, I have a set of links for more resources on Canvas. When you go deeper into it, if it comes up, again, I'll have it at URL to download this at the end. Now, get to the video tag, which is basically image tag for movies, right? You take a movie file, drop it in as a video file. Now, the difference is in browsers, right, with image, everybody supports PNG, everybody supports JPEG, everybody supports GIF. With movies, it's a little bit different. Firefox and Opera support something called OGG, and Chrome, Safari, and IE support something called MP4, which means if you show a movie in MP4, it won't show up in Firefox and Opera. If you show a movie in OGG, it won't show up in Chrome and Safari. And this has like been one of those things where people fight for months and months over little, like this is one of those kind of pain things. Long story short, you can transcode into both, and basically you can say video file, if you use OGG, use this one. If you use MP4, use this one. So it's a little bit of work for you on the content creator side to create it to handle both browsers, but it's not really that difficult. Audio is image for sounds, right? And let me show a quick demo of these in action, just so you can see kind of, it's a really brain dead simple, how easy you can just kind of get into using them. So let's go with video. And you'll see here I've got a video tag with a source and the type being MP4. And then if I wanted to support other browser manufacturers, I could. But this is just for me, and I don't use Opera or Firefox, so I'm leaving it like that. Not that they're not perfectly capable browsers, but not for me. All right, so video. Boom, that's it. You'll see here that it's got controls. I can control this via JavaScript. I don't have to control it via JavaScript, but you know. The guy's okay. The guy's like a professional stuntman who like flew in like a crazy like 24-hour flight the day before, and he was just completely jet lagged. But he still gets work. He actually shows this off. He gets work off of it. I love that aspect of that story. And then the next one you'll see here, I've actually embedded two audio clips in here. And again, the same sort of thing with audio. I put different sources. I want to put support different codecs. But that's pretty straightforward. It's going to make a very bare bones vanilla player audio that I can just not just picking random music clips. I'm going to use them in the next demo. I'm not randomly pulling out classic 1930s music for no reason. There you go. I've got these players. I can play audio with them. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the audio API. So we've got audio, right? It's just the audio tag, which is, like I said, image for sound. Then we also have the web audio API, which, as best as I can figure, is like Canvas for sounds. So like Canvas, I can pull in an image and just display an image using an image tag. And that's fine. If I want to manipulate that image, fool around with color values, draw stuff on it, what I really need is Canvas. So if I just want to play an audio sound, then the audio tag is all I need. If you want to manipulate that sound, then you're going to need the web audio API. Let me show that off real quick. So let's web audio. Okay. So you'll see here there's a lot of code. But basically, here are my 3 important files. Right? Play audio, play simmer, play edit, and play edit flow. So what I do here is I'm going to play 3 clips of music. I'm sorry, I'm going to play 2 clips of music. And then the third time I play 1 clip of music, I'm going to slow it down by a great deal and then overlay it with another piece of music. And that's very hard to do with the audio tags, but the audio API makes it really easy. So let me show that demo off. Okay, how many people have seen Inception, the movie Inception? Okay. So this should be cool whether you've seen Inception or not. But basically, here is the kind of the main piece of music that you always hear if you've seen Inception or you've seen the commercials that you associate with Inception. So like, this is it. This is after you've seen the movie, this is the music in your mind if you have a nightmare about this music. Okay, now in the movie, it's all about going into dreams, and each time you go into a dream, you need like you need some way of signaling from a higher level of the dream to a lower level. Time slows down. It's kind of a sci-fi movie, obviously. And so what they use in that movie is they use this piece of music from Edith Piaf. My French is terrible, but no, je ne regrette rien. And they use that piece of music to signal, hey, time's running out. So you play that piece of music, and very nice. The characters can hear this movie in the lower level dream, and should trigger them, hey, we got it. But as you go through the levels of the dream, time slows down. So what the composer did, took that piece of music. What happens when you slow down that original piece of music? So that's the French song, slowed down. Should overlay. There's the theme. So I showed the composer basically just took, to compose the entire score based on music. He just took the original song, slowed it down, and wrote all the rest of the music based on it. I think it's just from a musical standpoint really cool, really clever, in that like a plot point becomes the score and the score becomes a plot point. It's really kind of crazy. Anyway, what's cool here is all that audio manipulation I could do, where I slowed it down, where I overlaid it with the other sound, that's all being done with the web audio API. You couldn't have done that with HTML before, and in fact, you can only do that with Chrome right now. Chrome is the only browser that will support this demo. But it's cool, it's coming, just like Canvas is doing this for images, this is going to do that for sound. It's what's eventually going to lead to really good HTML5 gaming down the road. Okay, and there are a bunch of other APIs, but I'm kind of running up against time, so I want to make sure I show the CSS stuff that I really know very well. But there are a couple other APIs talk about offline storage and drag and drop. Basically, this makes browsers more capable of interacting with the desktop to make it more like an app as opposed to just a kind of ephemeral website that you kind of go away from. So this concludes everything I'm talking about HTML5. I have some CSS3 stuff to show off, but any questions about HTML5 before I move forward? Yes?
Music API, can you actually play the sounds backwards?
Yeah. What you do in that, I rate limited. I said play it at 0.3 of the original. If I played it at -1 of the original, it would play it backwards.
Starting from the end?
Yep. Yes?
Where do like codecs come into with video playback and audio playback?
Well, that's the thing. Video codecs. Did you hear my explanation of that? Like different browsers do it differently. So what exactly is the question further than that?
I mean, never mind. I guess
that's okay. Basically, codec is the compression decompression algorithm for the video file. Certain browsers don't support certain codecs, and you can't add them.
So with the container file then, like could I play an MPEG-4 codec inside of a QuickTime, for instance?
You could download that file and yes, play it within a QuickTime. Yes. Is that answering your question though? I feel
not really.
Okay. Why don't you finish me at the end and I'll.
I have a great talk I put together about codecs last year.
All right. I'll look after that.
Are there limitations to what audio files can be played? Just like there are limitations.
As far as I know, MP4, WAV files past that, I don't know. I know there's a similar audio thing
Okay.
with browsers, and I forget them off the top of my head.
That's fine.
I apologize. And all this stuff is really in flux too. That's the other really painful thing about it. Like it's supported one week, and then, or it's not supported one week, and then next week, oh no, we can do that. We've been able to do that since, a week ago. All right, so I'm going to quickly go into CSS3. Remember, CSS3 is a series of modules, right? It's not really one thing. But let me talk about some of the really cool modules that they have. Transform, being able to take objects and manipulate them through space. Shadows, being able to drop shadows on stuff without having to resort to image files. Same thing with gradients, being able to color gradient thing, DOM elements. Transition, so kind of rudimentary animations. Basically says if you're going to move, if you're going to change over a period of time. And then real animations where you can actually go in and actually animate stuff with CSS. So let me show you a couple of these in action. Okay, so let me first show the comparison. So these are both, anybody here do GitHub at all? No? Okay, cool. Long story short, if you want to advertise, you're in GitHub, you can pull down these browners and say, go to my site on GitHub. That's all these things do. Now one of these is an image, and one of these is being rendered by CSS. So one of them is text, and the other one is just the image just in text kind of style. The way to really tell this is to blow it up, and you'll see the one on the right is the image, right? Because when you blow it up, it distorts, whereas the one that's CSS doesn't distort as we go through. And in fact, if I can do this right, this text is, I can actually highlight this text. It's DOM text. It's nothing crazy. I'll show you how this is put together. Show you the CSS involved. So here is the link. If we look at the source of this, you'll see it's nothing too crazy. It is an href stored within a div that's got an ID of banner. Nothing too crazy here. I can now start selectively adding CSS to it. So I can add some layout elements here, right? It'll just kind of space it out a little bit. I can add the color to it. That CSS isn't that crazy. I can add a nice font to it so it looks a little bit different. Obviously, the CSS isn't that crazy. Now let's start going to the real stuff. So I want to rotate this. Now you notice I've got 4 lines to rotate this, 4 lines of code. And each one has a prefix except the last one. So this is one of these conversions that's actually just kind of fired up within the last week within the HTML world of whether or not we should be supporting them. Each one of these obviously is a browser, right? Mozilla browsers, WebKit browsers, Microsoft browsers, and then vanilla one. Browser vendor prefixes are very important. They basically allow a vendor to fool around. Originally, Microsoft's version of some of these were completely, I guess to put it kindly, would be ass backward. They were just terrible. But they were able to experiment and fool around and figure out that they were terrible, and then so the standardized one is fine. But basically, so for this one, if I wanted to work in multiple browsers, I have to make sure that I hit all of the browser prefixes, and then eventually get to a place where I'll only need to transform one, but that's further down the line in the browser starts supporting. So I'm going to rotate that. You'll see it rotates it, but it kind of moves it off the screen. So to do that, I have to add an origin, which is basically saying rotate it from this point. I do that, it's going to pull it back in. We're getting really close to the final version of it. I'm going to add a background. Now, if you notice in the original one, there's sort of like an orange ribbon on either side. If I add the background, it might not show up too well in here. Can you actually see that difference in the back? Okay. Very small detail, but again, that would be hard to do with just CSS. Basically, that's a gradient. That's a very small gradient. I say over a very short period of time, switch between these 2 colors. And then finally, I'll add the shadow, and so when I blow it up, you'll see there it is in all its glory there. So all that's capable of CSS. I'm able to do something that looks a little bit better in some ways than an image that's doing the same thing. We'll also show off transitions. So transitions, let's look at the source code for this. Again, this is one of those ones that I'm being very developer-y and ugly in my demo, and I apologize. Let's see. Okay. All I'm going to do here is basically these 3 lines. I basically hit a property. In one case, it's the WebKit transform, which is the how rotated it is. In one case, it's the left, how far to the left it is. In one case, it's background color. And each one of these will say, over 2 seconds, I'd like you to ease in the change. So basically what this says is anytime any element changes the display of this element, when you go to change it, don't just change it. Make it take 2 seconds to make that change. That's all that does. So basically this is going to allow for kind of some rudimentary animation. So we go back to this. I hit spin. I'm going to change that. It's going to spin it over time. Right? I'll spin it backwards. I can do the color too. It's going to slowly go to red and then slowly go back. And obviously it can chain these and have multiple happen at the same time. I'm actually going to trigger all of them at the same time. You'll see it goes over there and it kind of comes back. So with this, you shouldn't do full-blown animations in this, but this is really great for things like I go to hover over a link and instead of quickly going to that color, it slowly goes over. And what that does is the user is going to notice that slow change just a little bit differently than they would the kind of rapid change. It would make a better user experience that way. So that is what I wanted to show you from CSS3. A quick question that comes up is why CSS3? A lot of that stuff you can do in JavaScript as well as CSS3. CSS3 has 3 basic advantages. One, it's hardware accelerated, which means on mobile devices it's going to use the graphic processor on the mobile device instead of the processor, which means it's going to be faster, it's going to be smoother, it's going to use less power. Philosophically, a lot of these things are display issues anyway. They're not really behavior, they're the way things look and feel, so they belong in CSS. And finally, the hardware accelerated, I can't really stress that enough. The fact that these are hardware accelerated means they're going to be better for your users and better for performance, just better. So conclusions, there's one thing I wanted you guys to come away with from this. I think it would be this. Keeping in mind that there is HTML5 and there's HTML5. Hopefully you know a good bit about both. I'm going to open it up for questions, and then we're going to have a 5-minute break, switch between speakers. This Presto will be up at slideshare.net/tprime. That's the URL I want to write down. It's not up yet. I'll have it up by probably by tomorrow morning, because I was changing this, because I was changing it up to the last minute. If you want to contact me, feel free to write me at terry.ryan@adobe.com, terry.ryan.com, or on Twitter at tpryan, and I will answer questions real briefly. Then I'm also going to give the talk at 5, so I'll be around after that. If you have questions, hold on until that. But any questions? I silenced you. All right. And thank you guys very much for your time.